Great. Well, thank you, first of all, to the SEAHO, to the program committee, and to everyone that's been involved in coming up with this opportunity for us to have a conversation and to talk about, I think, a topic that's near and dear to us, and a topic that I think is really helpful particularly for mid-level staff members that may not necessarily be having a lot of training in this particular area, but could really benefit from just a conversation around how to manage vendor relationships from the entire life cycle of that, from the virtual exhibit hall floor to when you go back to your campus, and then everything from how to say yes and how to say no to them. And so we have a presentation here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, do you guys see my screen here? Great. So it might be helpful to kind of backtrack here and just provide some context as to where did this session come from. Really, this conversation came as a result of conversations that Steve and I were having internally, but then also a conversation that we have with Zach and Bryan about what does it mean to move into a mid-level role, knowing that there are going to be some pieces that you are going to be trained on and perhaps some pieces that you're not going to be trained on, right? And so what we often find, particularly with people that are working within residence life at the beginning, and then transition to a housing operations role or even a mid-level residence life role, is that the work becomes a little bit more collegial in nature, right? You go from managing one building to now working with multiple campus partners in order to get a job done. Or working with vendors, right? Everything from furniture to software to insurance to anything else, right? And so your ability to work not only across the organization, but outside of the organization becomes that much more important. And so what does that mean, right? As a mid-level staff member, when you're having conversations on a virtual exhibit hall floor, how do you manage that relationship with a vendor that may want to work with you? May want to bring some kind of product or service? How do you manage expectations with your team internally, right? Including your supervisor and the people around you, right? How do you tell a vendor no, right? And so that's really the part of the conversation that we're having today. And so we have a number of people from different backgrounds here that can really add a lot of value to the conversation. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and a little bit about their background. So Steve, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Alberto. I really appreciate that. It was a great introduction. And Dylan and Natalie, thank you very much for hosting, and it's been a great experience thus far. So my name's Steve Fucci, Vice President of Campus Development at GradGuard here, and I've been with the team I've been with the team for the past 7 years. It's a little bit more than that. We need to update that slide, Alberto, I guess. That's on me. But no, I'm originally from Boston, and now I reside in Phoenix, Arizona. I am one of the four of us who does not have any higher ed experience. I never worked in housing, and Alberto teaches me a lot about housing every single day, and the nomenclature and certain things. But my background was really in the insurance industry, and so for me, this is a really great topic because I've had the pleasure of working with Alberto and then also working with our campus partners and really getting to learn kind of those relationships and how they can be different from industry to industry and what's really important. And so, I'm just kind of happy to be here, and I'll kick it over to Zach.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Alberto and Steve for including me and Bryan in this session, and hope everyone's having a good conference so far. My name is Zach Blackmon. I currently am the Associate Director for Operations at Wake Forest, where I oversee everything from occupancy management to marketing to process oversight and office operations. And in that, work with a number of our vendors who serve our campus, including GradGuard. So happy to be a part of this conversation. I think I'm kicking it to Alberto.
Yeah, why don't we actually have Bryan share a little bit about himself and his background.
Perfect. Sorry, everyone. My power decided to go out the minute the presentation started. What a lucky day. So good morning, everybody from sunny Miami, Florida. My name is Bryan Ensel. I serve as the Associate Director of Housing Operations and Facilities here at the University of Miami. I've been here for 6 years. It's hard to believe that long. Time flies when you're having fun. And I'm originally from the Northeast, and I am a SEAHO transplant, and I have no intention of revisiting or leaving the SEAHO region because I selfishly love the weather that much. So I cannot complain about that. I have my degrees from State University of New York up in Plattsburgh, which you probably never heard of. If you know of where Montreal is, it's about an hour south of that on the Vermont border. So very cold, very windy. Now you see why I live in Miami. And so I'm super excited about working with GradGuard. It's been something that I've worked with a lot at Miami and actually helped bring them there. So super excited to be here today with everyone.
Yeah, thanks. And like I said, my name is Alberto. I'm the Senior Director of Campus Partnerships at GradGuard. Essentially, my role is to, I lead the team that manages the day-to-day relationships with our renters insurance partners. So best way to think about this is after a school decides that they want to work with GradGuard or most other companies, that relationship needs to be managed on a day-to-day basis to make sure that the school is getting everything that they need, right? That we're thinking of creative solutions as to how to meet the school's needs, that our schools are providing some feedback to us as to how we can improve those kind of components. And so I've been working here for the last 4 years. Prior to that, I worked in residence life and housing for 7 years at Utica College, Binghamton University, and Arizona State University as well. Yeah, I think it might be helpful also to talk about our subject knowledge, right? What are we bringing to the table, and how does that inform the conversation that we're having today? In terms of our relationships here at GradGuard, so we're trusted by more 400 colleges and universities. So all of those are just kind of different relationships that we've had, that we've learned a lot of things along the way. And Steve can attest to this in the sense of how those relationships have evolved, right? Right around 2014, we really started to look at how can we change the paradigm of our relationships with schools to move away from this transactional, like, hey, we're here to just do insurance, right? And to make sure your insurance needs are met. To
Alberto, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to chime in. You said I could kind of help out a little bit there. We used to show up to conferences to kind of give everybody a little what led Alberto and I to really look into this topic. We used to show up to conferences and we would just sell insurance, and we didn't know anything but selling insurance, right? And we didn't know how to build relationships. And I like to say that I noticed that, and then when Alberto joined the team, he helped me really kind of find a way and learn how to build relationships and partnerships. So sorry to cut you off. I just thought it was a good point to kind of add.
Yeah, that's really helpful, right? And it's really those kind of relationships that we're going to be talking about today, right? How do you build those relationships from scratch? How do you, even if you have to tell someone no, right? How do you fortify that relationship over time? Because of the fact that that relationship might come to fruition at another university or something. Or maybe you don't work with the vendor, and then you can still use them to volley ideas and things from that. And certainly I think Zach and Bryan have acquired a lot of those years of experiences from managing not only the GradGuard relationship, but other relationships as well. Steve, why don't you share a little bit about kind of like the learning objectives and what the outline for today's conversation is going to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I try to not read off of these slides, but every once in a while, you kind of need to go through bullet by bullet. But, so I think that in the past, we always talked about, the exhibit hall, right? You go down the exhibit hall. How do you interact with vendors? You get me's of the world, right? Who's trying to rope you in and talk to you and tell you a little bit about what we sell, or have you heard about us, ask you these questions. And, it really has changed with COVID, and you have this virtual exhibit hall experience now. And so learning how to use that as a resource, I think it can be almost even more intimidating. In person, you can kind of see, well, oh, there's 30 people at this booth. Maybe I'll go over there because I can just kind of, blend in. But you don't know who's in the virtual exhibit hall, right? So you might be the only person there, and so you might get a lot of stuff sold to you if you enter one of those rooms. But and then how to begin and maintain that relationship. I think that it's important to make sure that you're not over promising, right? Things like that, and assuming that you're going to get sold something right away from the other end. What you're going to do when the conference is over. How are you going to bring this back to your peers? How are you going to bring this back to your supervisors? How to talk about it and present it to them, right? Ultimately, I assume you're not going to bring something back that you wouldn't want your school to use. So how do you kind of educate your peers in what would be a good way to go about that? And then making a plan, as you could see too. And then, lastly, now that you've told them, here's what I want to do, here's what I think would be great for our institution. How do you do when you receive the answers, the yes, the maybe, the no with your peers, right? When they say, let's table that, or they say, no, we can't do that, or something like that. How do you kind of work that relationship with the vendor moving forward without maybe leading them on, without maybe telling them, no, when it could potentially be a yes? There's a lot of possible outcomes, right? And so you want to be able to make sure that, you're setting yourself up for success, as well as making sure that, the vendor knows that where they stand too. So.
Yeah, that's perfect. And so we start off with this idea of viewing the exhibit hall as a resource, which Zach and Bryan are going to get into here in a second, right? But it's really this idea of, if you think about a conference as an educational opportunity, the exhibit hall is also one of those pieces, right? And one of those pieces that you can derive not only relationships and things, but then also best practices and things like that. So Zach and Bryan, why don't you share a little bit about just this idea of viewing the exhibit hall as a resource, both as when you were entry level, and maybe how that's different from you as a mid-level professional now, and how you view that experience.
Sure. Thanks, Alberto. Yeah, I think as Alberto mentioned, and I think this slide represents well, right? There's a range of things that vendors in the exhibit hall can offer to you, right? It's not just the fun tchotchkes or the straws. It's, their knowledge, their perspective on the industry or your campus, ideas, etc. I think about this from the, as an entry-level professional, the exhibit hall always felt like this sales floor, right? Where if I didn't have buying power, I didn't have power. But the reality of 99% of our campuses is no one's signing a contract on the exhibit hall floor, right? We all have procurement processes. We all are going to have to take something back to our campuses and work it through a process. And so it's really learning about the opportunities that are out there and starting to build those relationships. From my experience, it often is a year, 2, 3 years in the making of building a relationship with a vendor before you're able to bring them on board, or particularly if you're making a transition between vendors in the same kind of market space, right? That doesn't happen overnight. So I think for the entry-level folks, I would say certainly, just get out on the floor and learn. Ask vendors about their product. Ask about, what other schools have done with it, and hear what they share. If that doesn't help you in your current role, it will certainly help you as you progress and become a decision maker. And then one of my tips and tricks for folks, particularly if you're an entry-level professional, is find some time with a decision maker in your department, whether that's your SHO or a director who might have purchasing power over an area, and walk the exhibit hall with them. Let them introduce you to some of your key vendors from your campus. Thank them for their business and start to learn from them. So, Bryan, what would you add to
that? So the biggest thing I would say is I'm naturally extroverted, so I naturally talk to everybody I interact with, and I lose track of time at SEAHO. And I'm like, oh, I was standing here talking, having a cup of coffee for 40 minutes, and I missed the presentation I was supposed to do. That's me. So I think I find I thrive in the exhibit hall, but that's not for everybody. And when my first time I went to an exhibit hall was in 2012, and I was petrified because, again, similar to what Zach thought, I can't make any decisions. I'm fresh out of grad school. I don't know what's happening here, but oh, look, they're giving away something. Let me go, for anyone who's worked in student activities and goes to NACA, that is how many bags of fun can I bring home? So I find it very beneficial that I walked with my SHO at the time. And that was super helpful because at minimum, all you have to do is thank the vendor for being there. Even if you have no intention or your campus isn't quite ready to do something, the joke is, Alberto and Steve, how long did it take us to to finally land it? It takes time and relationships, and it's not.
Did we lose Bryan again?
No, did you?
I think we're good.
Okay. No, I I think it just takes time, energy, and effort to do that. So it's really important to kind of keep those contacts alive, because, and being upfront about, you know, I'm new, I'm trying to learn this process. I want to make sure that, you know, I one day will be able to make these decisions. So what are the things and the questions that I need to start asking now? And that's something to certainly work with Joe about, because they'll guide you through that process. And, you know, I also think that there's something beneficial for entry level. You have a unique perspective of what's kind of, you know, the boots on the ground of what are the true issues that students are facing, because we're here for the students at the end of the day. Sometimes there's, you know, you have a very seasoned professional with 20+ years of experience, which is wonderful. However, there's a 20-year gap between sometimes what's happening, and some things get lost in that translation. And it's not a bad thing by any means. It's just the reality of the positions and the way that kind of our organizations are set up and operate. So I always find it beneficial to take that information back and kind of put it together in a nice bundled package before presenting it back to senior leadership.
Yeah, and I would just add, while Alberto transitions us to the next slide, that, you know, you also, regardless of your position, you know, our entire departments, more often than not, are not at SEAHO or whatever conference you're at, right? So, you know, keep an eye out for your colleagues. You know, I think about in my office, our card access and kind of key management team lives within our office on our campus, and they're often not at the same conferences as us. So if I see, you know, a cool product or vendor in their space, I may just take that information back to them for learning for them, right? I may not be able to make that decision, but I can pass resources along to my colleagues. So as we think about how you approach that vendor relationship, you know, I think this first bullet here is really important, right? Our vendors just want us to be transparent with them. They understand that, you know, they're not going to come to a conference and get to talk to every senior officer who has buying power for the entire time, right? Again, it's about building those relationships on their side as well, so that when folks move up in the organizations, you have a relationship with the folks who are now making decisions. So be transparent about what you're looking for or asking for from them, or just, you know, being transparent that, you know, you're glad they're here and you wanted to hear a little bit about their product. Ask questions. Again, you know, Natalie and I went through the same grad program, and a director who always tells her grads, like, if you do nothing else, ask somebody about their product, right? She talks about learning everything she's learned about furniture from exhibitors on the exhibit hall who will spend the time to get down on the floor with you and turn furniture over and talk about how their furniture is made. And that's how you learn about the areas of our work that you don't get to do day to day, right? Not many of us get to work across residence life, assignments, housing, and facilities in everyday, day-to-day work.
So kind of getting back to, you know, the reality of everything. And okay, so this is great. You've started building these relationships. Maybe you have a lot of interest in this product and you're really kind of jazzed up about it. How are you going to explain that in a way that shows that you didn't just have a really fun time at SEAHO with a couple of vendors, and you know what, I think we need to make this investment in them because they seem like good people. That's certainly part of it. However, look at it as it's kind of a long-term relationship in the sense that you're starting here and you want to make sure that it's something that other people want and that it will actually benefit your students, not just because you want to bring it back because you kind of have that iron sword of like, well, I saw this and I need to have this because this is what I need to do. It needs to be, you know, relevant to your student population. And that's something that you are going to know, and only you. And it sometimes is a difficult situation where you may feel one way about the product and maybe you go back to your campus and they don't necessarily see those same viewpoints. And that's why it's super important to ask students, ask your student staff, ask some of your other professional staff. I think sometimes we get lost in our own agendas as far as, well, I want to do this because it'll make my job easier. When really we need to flip it and say, how is this service going to benefit the student experience? Because by benefiting the student experience in turn makes our roles a little bit easier, because we can say, you know, well, did you sign up for this? No, I did not. Okay, well, here's the ramifications of not doing that, or here's some of the ways to do that. So, and again, kind of like, that deflating conference high, I think that's going back to those conversations over time. And you may have an initial conversation, have all these ideas, you get back to your campus, and then, okay, life happens, you're in selection, you're in recruitment, it's summer, and it's like, it's fall again. Okay, what happened? And then people are reaching back out and you're like, not now, I'm busy, I don't have time for this, just leave me alone. So we've all been there. And so I think just understanding, getting that buy-in is super important. And that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I think, Brian, your point about the conference high piece, I would say, when I have found myself really excited or energized about what a product or service might be able to do for my campus, that energy doesn't wane after a month, right? So if I go home and get caught up in the work, and then that vendor follows up in a month and I'm still energized about their product or service, then that's usually one of my keys of like, oh, this might be worth exploring, because like clearly there's enough there to keep me energized and thinking about it.
Yep.
I was going to say, Brian, your example sounded a lot like working with GradGuard, the ramifications of not enrolling in a service, right? And then me following up and you being like, Steve, now's not the time. So
exactly. Real life examples.
It's true. I just wanted to add though, I think that it's really important to know that on our side of the house, on the vendor side of the house, we have these exact same experiences. I mean, Alberto and I see products and services that we feel can make our life a lot easier. And I bring them back to our leadership, right? Our CEO and others. And, sometimes I have to be told no, and I need to make it relevant. I need to explain to my peers, right, as to why this product or service is valuable for us, whether it's going to be to get more schools to say, yes, I want to implement GradGuard, or it's just going to be for the schools that we're already at and the students who have enrolled in the program, and how we can make our technology better for them, right? So, it's really a translatable thing no matter where you are in your career. And I just thought that would be the point.
Yeah. And Steve, what you mentioned, well, all of you mentioned, I think is pretty spot on, right? I think also there's this component of like, to some degree, you're putting your brand out there internally within your department and becoming a champion for this idea, right? And so I think to a degree, I think it requires like a more tactical level of how you create these coalitions from your department, right? And so it's knowing, okay, I just came back from this conference. What are my director's priorities right now, right? It's having an understanding of like, what's coming down the pipeline? What are the current priorities? How do I bring other people along the way before I bring it up to the CHO and get their feedback on it, right? Sometimes it's you having a conversation with a peer or with the associate director of finance to understand, is there even money in the budget for this? Or is there, how do I quantify this to senior leadership that it's worth the financial investment at a time where there are multiple financial priorities, right? And the financial landscape can change because of COVID, right? So I think it's also having a political understanding as to what is going on at your institution and how do you create consensus. And it's also this idea of coming up with a plan, right? It's not just, during a one-on-one bringing it up to your supervisor, but it's also being able to show that you've done the research and that you've looked at other competitors, that you believe that this is the right move, not just because you had a great conversation on the exhibit hall floor, but because you're serving as an advocate on behalf of the students, and you've done the research to say, this is the best option, regardless of how great my conversations were at the exhibit hall floor, right? And so Steve's gonna talk a little bit about how do you come up with a plan, right? How do you advocate for this particular idea and show it in a bit of a more quantifiable way?
Yeah, so Alberto and I had this idea that you can really take a set of criteria and look at each vendor and say, what are the important things to our institution, right? What are our values? What are the things that we want to pass on to our students? And then also, how do I kind of look at it in terms of dollars and cents a little bit too? What are the non-negotiables from maybe our general counsel? You know, whenever I've seen contracts go through before, or, you know, I've heard that this, that, or the other thing needs to happen. So, you know, this is just an example that we use now. Obviously, we only really have GradGuard to go off of. We can't talk about other vendors and what, you know, their score might be. But, you know, things like, you know, how many of my peers are offering this product or service? You know, that's one thing that we've learned, you know, kind of over the years, is that, you know, you kind of want to take a look around. What are the schools that we have? We use measurables with kind of across, whether it be within the state or in the same consortium or something like that, right? You know, as Alberto mentioned, is the product going to cost the school money, right? Or the product or service, I should say. Implementation time. These are things kind of for the most part that we've talked about a lot already, right? I think other things too, are they compliant, right? You know, when you talk about ADA or PCI, right? Have they filled out a VPAT for their ADA, right? And, you know, these are things that, you know, for the GradGuard example, obviously this might be a little bit of like self-promotion here, but you know, if you're going to work with a vendor at the same time, you do want to know that they understand what is important to the industry, right? Just because you have a great product or service and then you come into this realm, that doesn't mean that your product or service that worked in, you know, the steel industry, I couldn't really think of anything else at the time, but that doesn't mean that's going to be relevant for higher ed, right? So you want to make sure that they have all those, you know, kind of compliance pieces, processes, and other things in place before they just kind of go ahead and jump into your world. And then, you know, what's the benefit for the schools? What's the benefit for the students? And we figured, you know, you could give a score to, and obviously this is just an example that we came up with. It's not something that we're saying is like, you know, the guide to working with a vendor, but we'd be happy to share it with you. But yeah, then you can kind of come up with a score and rate it 1 through 5, and then average it out and see, you know, maybe you want to think about doing this if you're above 4, maybe you don't, right? So this was just one tool that we felt could potentially work in a way. But obviously there's many different ways that you can kind of assess, you know, do you want to have a relationship with this vendor or company? So.
And Steve, I noted this in the chat, but I'll just note that I think this type of tool and thinking is really important because, again, for many of our institutions, our procurement processes require us to consider multiple vendors, right? And to show how we went through those steps of consideration. So again, that's the other piece of, you know, building the relationships is you're likely, you know, particularly, I mean, I'm thinking about the furniture space at the moment, but, you know, you may build a relationship with 3 of our big furniture vendors because at some point in time, you're going to need quotes from all of them, and you may pick different ones for different projects based on the needs. And so building that relationship and understanding what they can provide helps you in this validating a pitch. So
that's a great point.
So what happens after you've made your pitch, right? You've gone to the exhibit hall floor, you've come up with a well-defined argument or position as to why you think your department may want to move forward with this. And maybe you've had some conversations internally with colleagues or with your SEAHO, right? But at this juncture, you're probably the person that's still engaging with the vendor, right? And so there's this kind of dance that you play, right? As Bryan mentioned before, right? I think when we started the conversations with Miami, I think it took a couple of years. I think Steve may have had hair on his head when we started the conversations about working with Miami, and here we are. But essentially, it kind of winds on into kind of these 3 categories, right? There's the yes, right? And so what does that mean in the context of what the next steps are? It's not just a matter of you're getting the approval from the SEAHO, but it's also how do you bring other people along? There's the no, right? Which could be, I think, the piece that brings resident site professionals a little bit more trepidation, right? As to how do you tell a vendor no and still maintain that relationship, or how do you be transparent? And then there's this kind of weird third option, which is the maybe, or I think this is a good idea, but it may not be the right time, which comes up often as well.
And Alberto, I just want to add on that front, you know, Alberto, you and I have been going to conferences for years, right? And you know what's one thing that we see at every single exhibit hall floor is a group of the same vendors, right? And you know, from the vendor side of thing, the reason why you see those same vendors is because they get it. They know how to navigate that yes, maybe, and no, right? They may not have the best service for every single school out there, but they may fit a certain niche, right? But at the same time, when Zach says yes to you, you know how to handle that. When Bryan says maybe or no to you, right? You know how to handle that, and you know how to respond, and you know how to make sure that you're not, one, burning a bridge, right? But more so than anything, but two, understanding that this may not be Bryan and Zach's top priority right now if they say maybe or no, right? This is something that they are certainly, you know, Zach, I think you said it best, right? Like that, you know, I'm interested, but I just don't have the capacity to kind of dive into this right now. So it's important to understand that, be understanding of that consistently, and not be kind of overbearing to a certain extent, right? Because you want to have that opportunity as a vendor when it rolls back around. So
yeah, Steve has had to witness firsthand my firm no to some colleagues. And it's, you know, because again, I mean, from the institutional side, right? Like if I want to do business with you, I need you to understand the ebbs and flows of our world, right? That, you know, I'm not always able to clear my plate to look at a new proposal from a vendor that week. And so if, you know, them following up with me every week probably doesn't encourage me to want to do business with them. And so, but moving to the yes, I mean, I will say quickly before Alberto dives into this, I think the key thing I want folks to take away from the yes is that the yes is just the beginning. The yes is permission to move forward. So then it's, how do you implement, if it's something that isn't directly yours to oversee, how do you be a good partner to the team that now has to implement an idea that you brought back to your department? Those considerations.
Right. Yeah. I think the other piece that is also, I think Zach alluded to this too. The yes, the no, and the maybe, it's not just a one-time thing, right? So let's say you get the yes and you start this new relationship, right? There are going to be times within the life cycle that you're kind of still in this, you're still using these tools, right? And I think Bryan and Zach could attest to this, right? We come up with all these crazy and creative ideas that we run by the schools that we already work with, right? And sometimes, and it comes down to some of these things, right? There are schools that say, yes, I think that's a great idea, let's move forward. There's still the maybe, and there's definitely the times where with current partners, they're just like, you know what, I like this, but I don't think this is the right fit, right? And so while we're talking about this in the context of onboarding a new relationship, these are skills that throughout the life cycle of managing that relationship also wind up coming into play as well. Steve is an expert at being told no, so I'm gonna let him shine with his expertise on this part.
That dates back to my college and high school days too, Alberto. So, you know, I think that you know, we put some common reasons that you'll hear as to why you might hear no, and how to kind of, again, like I said, navigate those things, right? A lot of schools will say, you know, we've never done this before. We're too busy. We talked about being too busy. We don't have the funds, right? And it's really important to kind of take that and understand it. Now, obviously, I kind of tend to look at these things from a vendor's lens, right? But, you know, from the school side of things, it's important to be open and honest when you talk about these things to the vendor, right? You know, if you are too busy, I actually just received an email this morning from someone who I've been talking to for over a year, you know, and he is very transparent. And I really appreciated what he said to me. You know, he was down 9 staff members, and he said, Steve, you know, we had a COVID spike. I'm down 9 staff members. I'm having to think about other things. I really appreciate you reaching back out. And I would appreciate if you could give me 6 more months. And I was very, like, I thought that was great. That was the best response I could receive, because I completely understand the situation. And it was one of those things where I said to him, of course, right? And that's how all those things should be handled. You're talking from one person to another. You have to kind of remove the fact that I sell something and I'm selling it to you, right? It's one of those things where, you know, we just both have to treat each other like humans in that scenario. And so, you know, I already really touched on some of these things. You know, it's important to maintain these relationships because things can often change. You know, there's networking outside of higher ed, and, you know, you want to remain in higher ed too. I think Alberto and I find a lot of satisfaction in the in-person conferences because we like to throw events and we like to have, you know, little happy hours. And one of the things that we always say at our happy hours is, for our partners, that bring your friends, right? Bring whoever you want. And you know what, at the same time, it's not because we're going to sell to you. We actually have a standing rule at our happy hour events that we're not going to sell to you. You can ask me about my product and I will say, thank you for coming. I'd rather you come by my booth tomorrow because that's where that happens. I would like you to enjoy your time with your friends, like you to enjoy your time with us. And, we can talk about whatever else, but, so it's just one of those things where it is such a relationship driven industry that it is important to us and it is important to our school partners to maintain those and always feel that they can count on us and we can count on them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very well put. And then finally, there's the maybe piece, right? Which I think Bryan, when he alluded to with the whole Miami thing and the fact that it took a little while, he has some experience in that whole area of like, how do you navigate this gray area where it's still a priority for the institution, but it may not necessarily be priority one, or there are other pieces. Maybe you're creating buy-in from other components outside of the housing department, and you have to bring risk management along or legal and all those pieces. So Bryan, why don't you share a little bit about just that whole maybe piece and how to navigate expectations with a vendor from your perspective?
I feel like I have to say maybe more than no. And I think that sometimes it's harder to say maybe because it's like that little glimmer of hope of, okay, yeah, this is going to happen. Maybe, I'm not sure. Versus, nope, not going to happen, not interested. I can't, do anything with that. So I have to say the follow-up piece is very important. Steve kind of talked about that, but it's all in the way and the tone and how you do it and the methods in which you do it. Because if you're seen as you're trying to push it, then you're going to kind of like, okay, maybe I need to take a step back. And like sometimes there's nothing that happens. I may say, Steve, reach out to me in 6 months. He does, and I'm like, oh, that's great. Nope, we're still in the same boat. Sorry, we're working on X, Y, or Z now, but I'm still keeping you out there. And I think not hurting people's feelings. I think people are afraid to do that a lot because then it's like awkwardly see you in the vendor area and I can't talk to you. I'm guilty of that. I've done that. So I know what that's like. So learn from experience. But seriously, don't be afraid to have that conversation. We have difficult conversations about everything else in the world, and we make this seem like a difficult conversation. It's really not. You're talking to a person, and probably a rational person compared to what we deal with on a daily basis. So it's quite pleasant. And so, there's, if other things kind of come into that maybe stage, that maybe kind of create those hiccups, just communicate them and be totally transparent with the vendor, because I think that goes a lot further than just kind of bringing them along for the ride and saying, okay, yeah, and then all of a sudden just, nope, not going to happen, and it just shuts it off. Or explaining a little bit more. And some vendors may be a little bit more aggressive in the sense of, they want to just learn what could they do differently. And it's not that they're, mad that you didn't invest in their product. They're just wanting to learn what could they have done differently, maybe in the follow-up pieces or the way that they interacted with you. So it's a two-way street learning wise.
Yeah, and I would just add that I often find myself in the maybe space, particularly with vendors who we already work with, right? GradGuard is somewhat unique in like the service that they provide is there, but often our vendors are rolling out new features or they want us to turn over a product as it nears the end of its life cycle. And so it's starting that like, okay, what does the next step in our vendor relationship look like conversation? And often those are maybes for a little while until we're ready to do something, but maintaining those relationships are important, because then when you need something in a hurry, whether that's a building flooded and you need replacement furniture, or you need to call a software company to turn a new feature on the next day, having that relationship helps you be able to get that work done quickly.
And I'll just add one last thing here. I talked a little bit again from the vendor side, and I talked about the good ones we see often over and over at conferences, right? They know at the end of the day that there's two pieces. We talked a lot about the relationship today and it being relationship driven, but there's the second piece of business, right? And you have to separate the two. So if Bryan says to me, maybe, right? I need to be able to separate and say, okay, I want to keep my professional relationship with you, right? Professional, personal, whatever it is that we have, we hang out, right? We'll get drinks or something like that. I want to keep that because you're a good person, I'm a good person, and I enjoy spending time with you. If you decide to do business with me down the road, that is separate, right? Those are two separate things. And like I said, the good ones know how to kind of put those two things apart. And that's important, right? Because you want to be able to say, you know what, if I say no to Steve, is he still going to go get a drink with me at SEAHO, right? Like, and Bryan, of course, you know I would anytime. But you know, and that's a very important thing. And so, you know, and I hope everybody knew who that was Carly Rae Jessman, and the call me maybe screenshot that, or just wanted to make sure that everybody caught that.
Yeah, and this slide here is proof that Steve did have hair when he started talking to me.
Yeah, just a sprinkle up there. Yeah.
But I know we're getting close to the end of time, and wanted to leave some time if there are any questions or anything from the audience that you guys have for us, or areas that you wanted us to elaborate on. Just looking at the chat here. Looks like there's some questions. Okay. Well, thank you for everyone for just attending just being part of the conversation. We left our contact information on there, so if you want to continue the conversation with us, feel free to send us an email, drop us a note. Our team pretty much attends every SEAHO, and so our hope is that next year we'll be able to connect in person. But if there's any kind of areas that you want us to elaborate on or want to have continued conversations, feel free to reach out to us. And again, thank you to Bryan, thank you to Zach for being a part of today's discussion, and for the SEAHO team for helping putting this together. And giving people an opportunity to have a conversation about a topic that's important to us. So thanks, and I'll let the moderators take